Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Nathan, we'll just give it a second to kind of let the audience make their way. I see we got some faculty joining us along with our students today. That's awesome. Wonderful. We got you a really good audience here today. All right. Well, we're going to maximize our time. I want to make sure that we leverage every moment of this hour. So we'll go ahead and get started. I know a few more people will make their way in, but we wanted to first off say thank you for joining this wonderful session. We have an amazing guest. I'll say we have two guests, amazing guests with us today. Dr. Ensminger will be leading the dialogue, and Shalani will be answering questions, giving feedback, kind of guiding the conversation. You do have access to ask questions in various ways. We did open up the chat feature to where we can dialogue in the chat box. We also have the ability, and Dr. Ensminger, and he said you can call him Nathan, he will be monitoring the Whova question portal as well. And then you also have the ability to use the raise your hand feature at any point throughout the session. And then we will get you unmuted, so then you can ask your question directly to Shalani at any point throughout the dialogue. So I wanted to say thank you guys for being here, and then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Ensminger, and we really look forward to a wonderful dialogue. Your interaction will help make this even better. So let's go, Dr. Ensminger.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here and to introduce this discussion with Shalani Kantaya and about this powerful documentary called Coded Bias. This is a very meaningful film for me for a number of reasons, in part because I study kind of issues of labor and gender and the environment. I teach courses on ethics, and it's in that last capacity that I think this film is just so welcome, because having taught engineering ethics and now information ethics for 25 years, there are sources that do such a good job of unpacking kind of complicated technical issues, making the invisible visible in ways that allow us as viewers to kind of understand and hopefully to respond. And my job today is, I think, going to be quite easy, because I'm just going to help direct all of the questions that no doubt you have about this film. And so, Shalani, I'm going to turn it over to you. I have many questions for you, but I thought you might want to introduce yourself.
Fantastic. My name is Shalani Kantaya. I'm the director and producer of Coded Bias. It's such an honor to be here with you today. And I want to thank you so much for taking time on a Saturday to host this conversation. It's my deep belief that conversations like this one spark the kind of change we need in the world. So thank you so much for taking the time and for hosting me.
I'm going to start a question of my own while the questions start to flow into chat. And it's about your choice of a central protagonist for this film. This film includes some of the great stars in the academic world. You should have a companion syllabus, which would be just wonderful. People like Kathy O'Neill and Meredith Broussard, Sophia Noble. But you chose to kind of focus this film on a young researcher named Joy Buolamwini. And I just, I'm curious about that choice and how you went about that choice and what it was like to work with this obviously very smart, but also charismatic and I think quite funny and charming young woman.
Well, I just want to say that unlike maybe many even on this call, 3 years ago, I didn't even know what an algorithm even was. And I think my only sort of street credential is that I'm a science fiction fanatic, and I'm someone who's probably watched Blade Runner, or definitely watched Blade Runner way too many times. And so much of what I knew about machine learning and artificial intelligence had come through the imagination of sci-fi filmmakers like Steven Spielberg. And I stumbled down the rabbit hole when I read a book by Dr. Kathy O'Neill, who you referenced, called Weapons of Math Destruction. And I don't think I really realized until that moment um, just how algorithms, machine learning, AI is increasingly becoming almost this invisible gatekeeper of opportunity, and deciding really important things like who gets hired and who gets pain medication, even how long a prison sentence someone may serve. And at the same time, as I was sort of grappling with the idea that we are outsourcing our decision making to machines in ways that really change human destinies, I came across a TED Talk that now Dr. Joy Buolamwini gave, and was kind of shocked and astounded to learn that these same systems that we are trusting so implicitly and putting our blind faith in have not been vetted for racial bias or for gender bias, or even more broadly, that they just won't hurt people, that they won't cause harm, that they won't discriminate. And I was just also quite shocked to understand that in many times these systems haven't even been vetted against some shared standard of accuracy outside of the companies that stand to benefit economically. And so that's when I really began to realize through books of many of the authors in my film, Virginia Eubank's Automating Inequality, Dr. Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression, that we could essentially roll back 50 years of civil rights advances in the name of trusting these algorithms to be fair, to be just, and to be neutral, when in many cases that's just not a fact. And I think as a filmmaker, even though I've been known to make a political film or two, my films never start off with politics. They always start off with a compelling character. And I think for me, I think meeting Joy, and that she was sort of had an unusual perspective as a poet, and as also someone who stumbles upon this, uncovers racial bias in systems that somehow Microsoft, IBM, and Amazon missed. And her journey to sort of sound the alarm became I felt like it had some teeth as a documentary, because in a film, what you're really trying to show is someone who goes on a journey and has a big personal change. The world is different when you started the film than when you finish it. And that's kind of, I saw a glimmer of that when I met Joy.
Yeah, I can see that. And what I know of your, and have seen of your other work, some strands that thread throughout your work. But as you say, the other pieces are maybe a little more situated on place and people stories, in a way that I suspect as a filmmaker are a little easier to work with from just a kind of narrative perspective. Whereas this is, one of I think the key aspects of the way we talk about artificial intelligence today. And I think things that comes out in this film is that the particular form of AI that is being pushed by the tech industry now, machine learning, is not all of the possible imaginations of what AI could be. At one point, I'm forgetting who, but one of your subjects says, we could have built Western notions of democracy and freedom and transparency into these systems, and we didn't. And that's partly a reflection of choices, but it's also a function of this particular technology. So all of that leads back to a question, which is about your body of work and kind of where you see this fitting in with the other kinds of questions you've been trying to ask and answer in your work, and maybe where this leads you to future projects, since, as you say, this was not a topic that was familiar to you prior to this.
Well, I think that all of my work in one sense or the other explores disruptive technology and
Mm.
how it impacts how fair the world is. In my prior work, I looked at solar energy and saw and sort of its promise to be really good for the working and middle class, and how it could be a tool to democratize and build economic opportunity for working people. So I'm always looking at, I'm sort of obsessed with technology. I read Wired like it's the Bible. I sort of am always fascinated by the world of technology and how it shapes human futures. And I'm sort of always engaged with, does that make the world more fair or less fair, and for whom? And so I think those are common themes that I explore in my work, and maybe someday I'll get to make a sci-fi about it.
Yes.
But that is always my obsession.
Yes, yes. I do think this film really captures the idea that technologies are not coming from outside of society, they're being produced from within it. And at one point, I think it's Kathy O'Neill who says, the real concern is not what AI is doing to us, as if AI is something that exists outside of humanity. It's what powerful people are going to use AI to do to very different kind of question, and leads to different conclusions about who has agency and who has power and what the political process could do. I see that connection in part because I'm really interested in computing in the environment and the kind of racial geography of computing, and particularly with water use. So I see a direct connection between AI and water. And so maybe I'm reading into your body of work some themes that you have yet to pull out. Can you tell us a little bit about the reception of this film and kind of where it's taken you, and who's interested? I'm curious if you've been invited by Amazon or Microsoft or Google to screen this or talk about it.
Well, I just want to say I made this film to bring more of us to the table. I think when it comes to artificial intelligence, all of the knowledge has been in the hands of the few. So all of the power has been in the hands of the few. And I think for someone like me who didn't have a background in data science or advanced mathematics, I was incredibly humbled and had a lot of imposter syndrome starting out to tackle subject matter about things that involve a complex kind of science. And I think that for many of us, big tech is sort of like this big magic. And what I hope to do with this film is sort of pull back the curtains on the Wizard of Oz and show a glimpse into some of the technologies that we interact with every day, and invite more of us to be part of the discussion. I mean, from the time we're 10, and especially with Gen Z kids, from the cradle to the grave, these technologies are going to be changing our lives and how we interact with the world, and redefining our relationships with it, and reshaping power in all these ways. And so I really wanted us to have a common literacy to talk about all of these issues. That being said, I've been completely shocked and floored that tech companies have invited the film. And I think every major tech company, except for Amazon, I maybe spoke too much about Amazon for them to invite me, but everybody else has invited the film. And that has been very heartening to me because I think that it shows that they're well-meaning, conscientious people who work within these companies, who know that bias is a problem and understand how important it is that we tackle that. And so I'm very heartened by that. And that being said, I think my mantra is also like, we can't leave the tech bros alone on this stuff. Like, we absolutely need more. First of all, we need to tackle the inclusion crisis in Silicon Valley, because I think that when you have an industry that's like less than 14% women of our AI researchers, that's abysmal. That's like being a doctor in the 1920s or something. Like, it is really abysmal. And I couldn't even find the statistics on people of color AI researchers. And this is like a technology that is going to shape our future. And I think half of the genius has been missing from the room. And so I'm very grateful for conversations like this one, because I hope it'll encourage more people to get into STEM fields, so that we can have the kind of inclusion that we need to mitigate bias. And I just want to just say that, like, one of the things I've grown in compassion for is that bias is not something that's just like in a few bad, corrupt law enforcement officers or something. It's like an innate human condition that we all have, regardless of our race or gender or sexual orientation or religious affiliation. And what that means is that we're all biased, and we need each other, and we need to work in inclusive teams, so that we can shine a light into each other's blind spots. And that's why I find inclusion so central to how we solve this problem.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever taken one of the implicit bias tests online, but it's very humbling to take those kinds of tests and to realize that you as an individual might be biased in ways that you don't even fully kind of understand, or are even in part of your conscious mind. I want to take a step back just for the benefit of our audience. So many of whom have seen the film, some haven't been able to see it yet and will be watching it later this week. And so I just want to maybe take a step back and talk about what we might mean by bias in an artificial intelligence setting. And so I thought I would just kind of bring you back to the kind of opening scene of this film, which is just wonderful, but it focuses on Joy Buolamwini's work and her discovery that the kinds of facial recognition software that she was used to using at MIT didn't work as well on her as it did on her white colleagues. And so she discovered that these systems work very well for identifying, there's a hierarchy, kind of white men and then white women, and then people of color who are lighter skinned. And down at the very bottom was the category she identifies with, which is a Black woman with dark skin. And there's a significant difference. And so you pick up on this, right? This idea that the algorithms are biased against women of color or people of color more generally. And bias here doesn't mean intentional, right? So that this wasn't a deliberate decision on the part of these designers. It was an indirect consequence of the ways in which these technologies work and the data sets that we train them on. And so because the data sets are focused on people who look like the researchers at Google and Amazon and MIT, which are white men, they tend to work very well on those groups. And then, so you kind of introduce this idea that that's one meaning of bias in the context of AI. And then you start to develop the implications of that. Okay, so what does that mean? Right? And maybe you could just pick up a little bit on that part of the story, which is, so what are the implications of this embedded bias in AI?
Well, I think the opening scene is very telling, because this commercially available facial recognition technology doesn't see her dark face as a human face. And it's not even that it detects, she wears a white mask which is whiter than anyone's face.
Mhm.
And yet it sees, I mean, there's no human being that looks like the mask of this face. And yet it registers this white mask as a human face, and yet it doesn't recognize her dark skin as a, her dark skin face as a human face. I need to say it in those terms because there's also a history there that is very painful, and somehow the machine also picks up on. But, there is, of course, the science of it, which is that these systems are programmed on data sets that are predominantly male, predominantly white, also predominantly middle-aged. So it actually also sees middle-aged faces better than it sees young faces. And so this facial recognition begins to see to make these kinds of biases, and has like a 66% fail, only is 66% accurate on women of color, but it's like 98% accurate on white men. And those are approximations. Joy would cite me because she gets the decimal points down to those things. So just, that's an estimation for scientists out there. But what I want to say is so deeply troubling to me as a filmmaker, and as just a citizen, is that this was a technology that was not being beta tested on a shelf somewhere. This was technology that was actively being sold to the FBI, actively being sold to ICE or immigration officials, and actively being sold and deployed, oftentimes in secret, by police departments all across the United States. And with no one that we elected, no one that represents we the people, giving any kind of oversight or limitation to what is just exposed as racially biased invasive surveillance technologies. And that's when I began to understand what's at stake here. In Detroit, there was a Detroit man who's like pulled out of his job, held for a week in a prison cell, and never asked for his license because facial recognition misidentified him. And it was quite by accident that we could even find that out. And in the making of Coded Bias, you see a 14-year-old Black child in the UK be stopped by 5 plainclothes police officers. The child does not even understand why they've been stopped. And it's only because there's a human rights observer that I happen to be following in the film that explains to him, like, you've been wrongly misidentified by facial recognition. That, to me, and I think that facial recognition as a filmmaker and a storyteller is the most invasive and easy way that I could explain how these algorithms work. And how high stakes they are, because our biometric data is quite like taking our fingerprint or a genetic swab, both of which police need a warrant and probable cause to do. And yet our biometric data is getting taken by private companies, used by police departments, oftentimes with no one that we elected giving oversight. And this has real implications for democracy. And I think in the making of Coded Bias, I saw, I just stumbled down this dark rabbit hole of all the different ways in which people can be hurt. From a health insurance algorithm that was actively giving white patients better quality of healthcare than Black patients. To a school teacher who is basically arbitrarily, you stand 10 feet away from this man and you can feel his dedication to the profession of teaching and what a great teacher he must be. And yet this arbitrary algorithm says you are a bad teacher, and he gets put on a list in danger of losing his job for no reason. And all of this speaks to a new kind of power. Because we're living in an age where you have a PhD, but the computer says you're wrong. Well, if you, who has a PhD, and the computer says something different, well, obviously you're wrong. The computer is always right. And we have this blind faith that we put in these mathematical computer systems as being fair and just and unbiased. And that makes this new type of power almost unquestionable. Just to cite another example from the film, what is so, shocking to me was that this could happen in spite of the best intentions of the engineers. It's not like there's some, nefarious engineers in a room saying, ah, ha, 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 we'll create this evil technology that will set back women and people of color 50 years, right? It is that this stuff is hidden in the data that is we're using to program these systems and these predictive models. So for instance, there's a case in the film where an Amazon hiring algorithm was implemented because the engineers were like, let's make everything more fair. Let's get humans out of the process. The machine will just sort the resumes and we'll have a more fair playing field. And lo and behold, that algorithmic system is looking at resumes and looking at what the definition of success in the past was, who got hired, who got retained, who got promoted over a number of years. And lo and behold, begins to discriminate against anyone it can discern as a woman. And you can imagine how that can affect people. And, Amazon caught the error and took the system offline. But these things happen all the time. And oftentimes we don't even know that an algorithmic system was involved in not giving us the loan, not giving us the health insurance we needed, not giving us the job opportunity we were after or higher education opportunity we were after. I just know I didn't get the interview.
Mhm.
I just know I was denied an opportunity, and we have no way of making, first of all, that the algorithm was used, and second of all, that it's been discriminatory. And this is where we have real implications for civil rights.
Yeah, this kind of idea of hiddenness and opacity is interesting. And I'd like to come back to that in a minute, because there's kind of one way of thinking about this is it's a consequence. And we might also think of it as a feature, right? That this is one of the appeals of these technologies, is that it makes things less visible. But we have a question from the audience, and we're going to try our system here. So Evan has very kindly typed this out, but Kelsey, I think we can make Evan able to talk. Evan, if you want to ask your question orally, go ahead.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. First things first, I just want to say it's an honor to meet with you virtually. I'm kind of a film buff, and this so far has been one of my favorite films of the year.
Oh, thank you. That's kind of you. It's
And
an honor to hear your question.
one thing I found really powerful about the film was the repeated lines by the AI in the opening and the ending scene. In addition to how, while it can be unintentional, there is bias in facial recognitions, mainly due to the, like you said, the coders being older white men and not enough diversity. And it can be used in people of color. But what really got me thinking was the recent news of Facebook's algorithm being intentionally and unintentionally manipulated for profit. My question is, do you think inclusion is enough to stop the manipulation of the algorithm, whether unintentional by, let's say there's not as much oversight or there's unforeseen flaws, or intentional oversight? Like an example I was saying was using it for profit. Is there anything we can do as the viewer? And do you think there is hope?
Those were a lot of questions there, Evan.
Sorry.
I'll try to tackle them. Thank you so much. Those are very astute, cutting questions. I don't think, in some ways, I think coded bias is mistitled, because it's not just about bias, it's about AI harms. And if we have facial recognition technology that works 100% on everybody, then we'll just have perfect invasive surveillance. And so I think that for me, it's not just about building the perfect algorithm. It's about creating a more human society, and about the fact that these tech companies have too much power. I was recently on a panel with Dr. LaTanya Sweeney, an incredible scholar who found out that Google search was criminalizing Black names. Like if you had a historically Black name, it would give you an ad for, her name was Latanya. So it was like Latanya arrested, even though she had no criminal record. It would start, the algorithm would generate that kind of data. And what she said, and she used to be the chief technology officer of the FTC, what she said was very powerful, which is she said, these, data brokers have become so powerful that they are rewriting the rules of society, which means that we, and without our oversight, and that means that we are moving from a democracy to a new kind of technocracy. And I thought that that was incredibly cutting. I think that there's a couple of problems. One is the business model. What Shoshana Zuboff refers to as surveillance capitalism, this idea that these big tech companies extract our data from us. We have no rights and no benefits, no economic benefits of them using our data. And it's making them all the most powerful industry, the wealthiest, most powerful industry in the history of the world. And I think that model of how we run these systems is an enemy of finding AI for the public good. I liken it to the fossil fuel industry because I think that it is extractive and unsustainable for democracy. It's the business model itself, I think, is leading to a stunning lack of imagination about how these systems work. I think that we just don't have enough laws here in the US. Europe has given us some model of what it looks like to put data rights in a civil rights framework, to put data rights in a human rights framework. They have something called the General Data Protection Regimen, which I allude to in the film. They also just passed the Artificial Intelligence Act, which bans, facial recognition in public spaces and a host of some of the worst, most detrimental things about artificial intelligence. And I think we need to push for that kind of legislation. And I just want to say that I would not underestimate the power of AI literacy. These companies, some of them are pushing baloney pseudoscience as legitimate science and thinking no one is going to miss it because none of us know how these systems work. And I'm so grateful to the cast of the film for giving me an education. So now I can look, well, wait a minute, can we even have an algorithm that judges if a teacher is a good teacher? Like, can that even happen? Like, what are we saying makes a good teacher? Is it just the test scores that go up? Or Palantir that says that they can judge where people are going to commit crime? I can now look at that and say, well, wait a minute, we don't have crime data. I live 10 minutes from Wall Street. What we have is arrest data, which is super different. And if we keep on sending police back to the same neighborhoods that have been over policed, what are we doing here? And so I think that the public understanding and getting an education about how these systems run, the crude logic and the data from the past that's ridden with historic inequalities is essential to questioning this kind of power. And then the other thing I just want to say is that we can make a difference. I'm not saying that in an idealistic, I'm like a black turtleneck wearing New Yorker. And so I'm very pragmatic about making social change. I'm not very utopian. But time and time again, I think I make documentaries because it reminds me that every day people can make a difference and do every day. And that not all the superheroes among us are wearing capes. And in the making of this film, I saw it time and time again, whether you're talking about Daniel Santos, the teacher who is wrongly judged by an algorithm as a bad teacher. And not only did his teachers union appeal and make that, algorithm illegal in Texas, but it also set precedents that we could question these algorithms on a due process standard. There's another case of the Brooklyn residents in my film, where not only did they resist their landlord installing this racially biased invasive surveillance technology, but they also inspired the first legislation in the state of New York that would protect other housing residents from the same. And the other thing that I've been seeing is the way local change can really make a difference, and how the communities that are the most technologically savvy, the technological hubs of this country, which goes in hand with my push for literacy, are the first to ban them in their communities. So Boston, Cambridge, Oakland, San Francisco have all banned facial recognition by law enforcement and in their municipalities. And so I think whenever we can push for local change at our college or university, in our city, writing a letter to our city council meeting, calling the school if we've got children and saying what's happening to my kid's biometric data when he goes to math class or she goes to math class. All of these things really help us leverage federal change. And then just to say, at codedbias.com/take-action, there's a host of other reading. There's a toolkit to host a screening of the film. And there are a number of heroic organizations, about a dozen, including the ACLU and Amnesty International and the Algorithmic Justice League, where you can, take 2 minutes to sign a petition or reach out to them to get more involved.
This
Again,
idea.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but we've had a number of really interesting questions or comments come in. And so I'll just ask, Catherine Thomas, we can unmute you if you'd like to share the anecdote you shared in chat. And if not, I'm happy to read it for the group. Would you like to do that? This is the part where Zoom fails us just a little bit.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. Yeah, I was just sharing about a time. First, I love the film. Particularly one of the things that moved me was that she did not see it as an issue with herself. She saw it as an issue with the AI, which was absolutely correct. And so that really kind of helped, that really kept me in a place of empowerment through the entire film. So my comment was, I visited a tech company in the Seattle area a couple of years ago with students of color, and they were super excited. They got to play with all this amazing tech. And along the wall, there was AI embedded cameras that was guessing the age of folks who were in the hallway. And for every, I swear, for every single young Black youth we had there, they were being like 25, 35. I mean, it was just one of the most stressful things, because they were kind of just like, ha, whatever, at the time. But I saw how serious that was, just because of the comments that I get regarding my own nephew and young Black youth in my own family about how these young children look like grown men to many in our society.
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate
that comment.
Yeah. Actasun, if you want to share, we can. You have in some ways a similar anecdote.
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Well, I'm a professor of mathematics at the University of Texas at Arlington, and I always wondered why on our 4th floor, where our department is located, only one woman can use the woman's bathroom because it's only for one person, whereas 6 men can comfortably use the men's room at the same time. So, but I don't know whether this was done intentionally or unintentionally, but perhaps many years ago, people who designed I guess, the bathroom situation, did not feel that there would ever be any women in the math department. Whereas now, well, perhaps more than half of our graduate students are women, and we have a sizable number of faculty members who are women, but still they line up in front of the women's bathroom, whereas men's bathroom, well, there's no problem. So, so apparently, the way we think, so somehow, is it the case that we don't have the vision to see the future? But it's possible that I'm even unconsciously biased, but I don't know, because in say 20 years, will I be also not necessarily accused of, but will I be a situation that even though I do everything to be unbiased, but will I be in 20 years be a person who created some other biases? So what can we do? Individually educate people or pass laws, but how can we have the wisdom to see things for the future? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. It was such a thoughtful question, and to Catherine also, such thoughtful questions. I want to say the same is true with film. When I went to India, I would have to, there was no women's bathroom in the lab developing film. And if I needed to use the bathroom where on the floor where the directors are, I would have to send my cameraman to clear out the bathroom and stand outside. And what I want to say is that none of us gets it perfect. And I'm very concerned also about cancel culture, and that we don't have a way of learning. Our vocabulary is constantly evolving to include people. And I'm constantly humbled and getting being corrected, and okay, I can't see you guys anymore. That's not right. And so we have to have a way, a safe space to be able to make mistakes with good intentions. And I think, when I was talking with my friend who develops robots, we were saying, like, what happens when the sum total of human intelligence is in one machine, right? Like, what are human good beings good for? And we decided it was our ability to make mistakes and do illogical things. and I think that I really have a lot more compassion for us, because we as a species will make mistakes and will fail. And I think that what I hope is that we do our best with our best intentions. And if we don't get it perfect, especially when people look at what we did now, 20 years from now, that they give us some forgiveness because we did the best we had with the best knowledge we had at the time. And that is constantly evolving. What fairness is, what inclusion looks like, it's constantly evolving, and we're constantly trying to do better. And so to me, some of this is about how do we create safe spaces inside our companies to have these kinds of conversations? How do we create safe spaces inside these processes where these technologies are being developed to have conversations about dissent, to have conversations about our humanity, what makes us as people? Because I think too often we talk about technology as if it has nothing to do with our humanity. And I think the more we can bring our whole selves into the spaces where these technologies are going to be developed, the more of our humanity or humane practices will be involved in the design and deployment of these technologies. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think that's the best way.
Shalini, if I could just add, you mentioned safe spaces, which we often think of as kind of metaphorical or figurative, but as the chair of a large department that defines itself. So we're an informatics department, which is a word that we chose to describe the kind of field of computing, not as computer science, but some other way of thinking about this relationship, and to kind of redefine it, to think more about policy, about design, more than just the kind of logic of algorithms. And we were having some issues with some students. One of the things we're very proud of is that our gender and racial balance in informatics is much better than it is in computer science. And there are a number of reasons for that. But we were having some issues with some of our women who were feeling uncomfortable. And it turned out that one of the solutions was actual space, that computer labs where people might feel unsafe, or where people were playing violent video games or consuming pornography. Not that those are necessarily things that women don't also do, but to be in a kind of confined space late at night with groups engaging in certain behaviors. And so one of our solutions was glass walls. It kind of changed the dynamic of the actual physical space. The kind of Google playgrounds that encourage a certain kind of male adolescent view of what it means to socialize and work, and but that might have class and race and gender implications for people who, for whom those aren't comfortable environments. So I guess I'm just adding actual space. So one of the ways we can think about change is to think about the built environment, not just the kind of algorithms, but the places where we do computing. We're getting close to the end of our time, and I do want to leave some time. I want to ask you about new projects, but before I do that, we have a lot of students in this place with us right now, and a lot of STEM students. So these are the people who, maybe more than the average citizen, have agency in thinking about how these are being developed. And I wonder if you have anything particular that you would say to the students who are themselves the people building these technologies. Kind of what can they be doing to make these better?
Well,
I know that's an unfair question.
No, I'm humbled by the question as
Yes.
someone who isn't a designer of these technologies. But what I want to say is to start by knowing how much power you have. Even in understanding how these systems work, you are probably no more than our Congress at this moment in history. I mean, how often does Zuckerberg get called into Congress and has to explain how the internet works, right? And so there is a lack of knowledge about how these systems work. And so you have immense power. The other thing is to understand that small decisions you make, will influence so many of us. I mean, there was a small tweak in the Facebook algorithm that I mentioned in the film, where basically if you just showed I voted, and then I voted with like your friends' faces, and it turned out in excess of 300,000 people to the polls, and they did the study twice, and the results were consistent. And it just goes to show how a tiny tweak of an algorithm can shape and change the lives of so many people and so many of the rights that we have. And so I think that understanding your power, and to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, and knowing that right now that power is unfairly concentrated in your hands, and that there are no laws that say you have to hire an outside ethicist. You have to bring somebody in from women's studies or Black studies, or someone to think about the Black Mirror episode you didn't think of, right? Or to think about the unintended consequences of something that you maybe had the best intentions when you were seeking out to make. And so I think, to me, it would be to go slower and more intentional in the process. I'm going to give you 4 questions really quickly that I've learned from sitting with data scientists. For one is to think about, for whom could the system fail? These systems are basically optimized for someone, which means someone is going to be marginalized by them. And to think about who that person is. Who is this person likely to fail? Who is the system likely to fail on? The second thing is, what are the consequences if this algorithmic system fails? Is it that their livelihood? Is it that they don't get health insurance? Is it their civil rights? To know what is at stake if the system fails. The third thing is, how transparent is it to even know that there's been a failure in the system? For many of us, we don't even know an algorithm was involved. How do we even know that there was an error in this black box type of system? And what is the recourse? And then the other thing is, if we can do all those things, know that it discriminated and said, no, I should have gotten the health insurance, or I should have got the interview. This was discriminatory. Something went wrong here. How easy is it to get a human in the loop and say, hey, there was an error. Can you fix this? And that human in the loop, because just to remember, we call these systems intelligence, but they don't have morals, they don't have ethics, they don't have compassion, and they don't have empathy. And if there were a human being who didn't have morals, ethics, compassion, or empathy, we would call that person sociopathic. And they're not the person we would hold up as intelligent. And so that means that these systems need our governance and they need our oversight.
I really, there are two, there was a wonderful answer to a hard question, but two aspects of it in particular that I appreciated, both as an engineer and as an educator. One of them is that, we all have responsibility for this. So one of the kind of disturbing things that I'm seeing in the corporate world is a kind of setting up an ethics group, especially an AI ethics group, as a way of saying we are dealing with this problem, and then ignoring what the group says. Or in the case of, I'm sure you probably know this, in the case of Google, where they fired two of their lead AI ethicists, including a woman of color named Timrit Gebru, but also Margaret Mitchell, both of whom were talking about image and voice recognition algorithms and exactly the kinds of questions of bias that your documentary speaks to, and they were just dismissed from the company. And so it dispersing responsibility throughout the organization, I think, makes it more resilient and more powerful. The second thing that you said that really struck me was about, so who is harmed when this system fails? And and in the film, you talk about the role of financial credit scores in the 2008 crisis, financial crisis. And, for those of you who haven't seen the film, part of the story here is about a deep history of structural racism in the US that takes the shape of federal housing coming out of the Ta-Nehisi Coates has particularly been effective in communicating how that shapes cities and access to housing and other kinds of things. And then fast forward to the present, where we have these AI algorithms which claim to be very, very sophisticated evaluators of financial worthiness, but are really just measuring zip code, which is a historical proxy for racial demographics, and then assigning either better mortgage rates, or in the case of the video, kind of actively pursuing certain demographics to sell them subprime mortgage loans, knowing, while at the same time you're betting against them in hedge fund markets. And there was this this remarkable fact that you brought out in this film, that moment was the largest loss of Black wealth in American history. And it's just astounding that at the heart of that are these AI systems, both financial trading systems and credit score systems. No one died, right? I trained as a civil engineer, and we had to think about consequences, and the consequences were death. But these consequences are real, even if they don't result in human harm. And so I think that's really a powerful mindset switch to say, what happens when these fail? So I really appreciate that. We are approaching the end of our time together, which I'm sorry for. I just want to look at some other questions, and maybe while I'm doing that, I'll ask you the next step. So what is next for you?
I'm working on a film about TikTok, and I'm completely obsessed with it, and I'm very curious about recommendation algorithms and their impact, particularly on Gen Z. Gen Z is the first generation of human beings who have grown up online and had their whole lives been datafied, and have how these recommendation algorithms work. And I call it sort of the invisible hand of that invisible nudge of power with recommendation algorithms. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, that's great. I just saw an article by a woman, I think she was at The Guardian, set up a Facebook identity and started it along a path, and ended up in kind of white supremacist sites within like a day and a half, where that was kind of almost exclusively the kinds of content that the recommendation engines were feeding her. Yeah, talk about the consequences of bias here. We are kind of at the end. I just want to remind everyone here who hasn't had a chance to see the film, we in the chat, both the link to the documentary, which will be open through the end of today, but also the code that you will need to access that film. So just scroll up in the chat if you haven't had a chance to see. I know it's been a busy week with this conference, or more than a week. And so please do watch this if you can. There it is. Thank you, Deb. And let me maybe just finish our time here by thanking you again, not only for your time with us today, which I think has been really informative, but again, for this film. I know that every time I watch it, I see more in it, and I'm more excited to show my students, and that's really important. I know at my institution, we put almost 300 students a semester through an information ethics course, and that's our opportunity to really change things, and your work is very quickly becoming part of the way we teach these issues to others. So thank you.
I'm so happy. Conversations like this one give my life's work meaning. So thank you so much for hosting me, and to everyone who participated today.
Yes. Thank you all to the participants, and to our hosts, and to our technical crew. We had no problems at all, which I'm just astounded by and thrilled. And I know that there is another session, I think, starting in a minute. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. It was an honor.
All right, so I'll just step in real quick. One, thank you, Nathan. Great job of leading us through that dialogue. For all the participants, thank you for staying with us. Just wanted to give just a real quick announcement about tomorrow. We are starting with our breakfast chat at 10 a.m. Eastern time, and then we'll head into a few of our sessions and do our wrap up in the afternoon. So just wanted to say thank you for making it through 2 days so far with us. I hope it's been very beneficial to you, and we look forward to hearing from you first thing tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at our breakfast talk. You guys have a wonderful afternoon.